Today, I'm doing something that doesn't happen to me very often, and I'm building something that I simultaneously love and hate at the exact same time.
God, that's annoying.
I've talked about it before in my videos, but one of the best parts about making furniture for YouTube is that I'm able to do just about anything I want, as long as I think it'll be interesting for people to watch, of course. So because of that, pretty much everything I make these days could basically be classified as prototypes, which means I get to try all sorts of new and different things, but I rarely get to refine ideas and make new and better versions of something. So that being said, let's start with what I'm making and why I love it. Let's start on a positive note. So I'm building a dining room light fixture. I'm not even really sure what these are technically called. It's not a chandelier, it's not a pendant light. It's just a hanging light fixture, I guess, with more than one light that goes over a dining table, which is usually in a dining room light fixture. And because I'm making a prototype and get to do whatever I want, it's going to have some curves, it's going to have some interesting lighting, and most importantly, it's going to look really cool, which is why I love it. Anyway, I'll get into a lot more of the details as we move along, but we're starting with these curved ends, and there are plenty of different ways to bend wood, but for this piece, I'm doing bent laminations, which basically means taking a piece of wood, cutting it up into thin slices, then gluing it all back together, but in a different shape. So we start by slicing things up on the bandsaw. The nice thing about using a bandsaw to do all of this is that, first of all, I can cut really wide boards since the blade is so tall, and on top of that, the blade is so thin that I'm able to get a lot more material from each board. And when I need around 20 or more layers for each curve, that means at least 20 cuts, and the amount of material lost from the thickness of the blade is significantly less than if I were to use a thicker blade like the one in a table saw. And even with that, you can see how much thinner the chunk of wood becomes once everything's actually been cut up. But when you've got math on your side, little things like that can really add up and make a difference. Something that I never really think about after a build, but that seems to be something that quite a few people are interested in, is how much time different builds take to do. To me, I know when I need to finish a piece, like a specific date, and I tend to not worry about how much time it takes me during that window. I guess I think about it more from a macro view of time rather than a micro view. But most of the questions I get are people wanting to know a specific hour amount for a build, which I can almost never give an accurate estimate. And if I think about it too much, I'll realize how much time I spent standing at the drum sander, sanding thin layers, and I'll get really depressed. I think people like to take a time estimate, then use that to get an idea of maybe like an hourly rate of how much you can make doing stuff like this. But it just doesn't really work that way. Or if it does, I should probably sue myself for not paying myself minimum wage. And because of that, I try to remember that the amount of time it's taking shouldn't matter much to someone like me. Now, if I were trying to produce these lights at scale and sell a bunch of them, then sure, time does matter. But when I'm just making one and it's the first time I'm doing it, I'll really only end up being bummed out that I'm not making it faster. And on this build in particular, I made one curved form to make all the bent laminations. So every time I used it, there was a lot of waiting around. Even just things like I'm doing here, where I'm getting all the layers wet and clamping them around the curve to kind of pre-bend them, meant everything was sitting overnight. And of course, I'm doing other stuff while things like this are happening, and I could have made more curved forms to have multiples going at the same time. But like I said, this is a one-off prototype, so I didn't want to use a bunch of material for something I knew I would use once, then just throw away. So all that's to say, I honestly don't know how long it took me to make this, and I honestly don't think it's really that important. Speaking of being smart with time and maximizing efficiency, if I were a more organized person, what I would have done is while each of the curves were in the vacuum bag and drying, I would have moved on to the next step. And since this is an edited video, I could just tell you that's exactly what I did, but then I'd be lying to you, and that's kind of a bummer for everyone. So let's pretend I was multitasking at this point, but just know I wasn't. This happened at a completely different time. So part of the design of this light fixture is that I wanted the light source to be all indirect light, which is the reason for this big white panel running down the middle. The idea is that the light source would be on the inside of the wooden curved box, which I guess is kind of the lampshade in this situation, and it would shine straight onto the center panel. I considered a lot of different materials for this, but the main thing I wanted was for the panel to be slightly transparent. So that kind of ruled out using maybe painted wood or something like melamine. The hope was for the panel to look like it was glowing on its own, like it was one big light panel itself. I also needed to consider that I would need to cut holes through the panel so I could attach it to the lampshade, which ruled out using something like glass. And I know you're probably dying to know what I used to make this panel, but here's a little cliffhanger because I need to thank Patio Well for sponsoring today's video. If you haven't heard of them, Patio Well produces a whole line of outdoor storage solutions, including metal sheds, easy to assemble plastic sheds, deck boxes, and small storage cabinets. They sent me a 6-foot by 4-foot metal shed, which I was able to put together in a few hours with the provided instructions. And I don't want to toot my own horn, but I was able to do it without their helpful online instructional videos. But just in case you aren't quite as savvy as I am, they have great instructional videos on their YouTube channel to help you get your shed built. And if you just aren't into the whole assembly process in general, they just introduced a line of plastic sheds that snap together with very few metal fasteners. I mean, look at this guy. He's literally kicking his shed together. It doesn't get much easier than that. And the best part is that I now have a waterproof and ventilated place to hold all of my precious gardening tools. Don't want those getting ruined. So, if you're looking to get your own outdoor storage solution, or if the idea of kicking together a new shed sounds good to you, you can use the code SBMT16 to get, that's right, 16% off your purchase of any Patio Well product. I'll put a link in the description, so go check out Patio Well and see if there's something that might work for you. All right, thanks Patio Well. So, if you haven't figured it out yet, I made my own panel by pouring a thin layer of epoxy that I dyed white. I really had no idea if this would work or not, and if it would give me the look I was going for, but it felt like it was kind of the best bet at this point. And at first glance, right out of the mold, I was really happy with how it was looking. You can even see here with just some reflecting sunlight, the panel is slightly transparent, so I was pretty hopeful it would give me the look that I was imagining. I can't imagine anyone would notice this, but I have a couple new tools in my shop. And something that I've always tried to do over the years is only buy tools when I have a very specific need. I started making furniture with some hand-me-down tools from my grandfather, some of which I still use, but whenever I find myself in a situation where I've designed beyond the capabilities of my current tools, I decide whether or not I want to upgrade. And this project was a perfect excuse for a bandsaw upgrade. Needing to cut veneers that were too wide for my current bandsaw, and then needing to make cuts like this one, made me realize I needed an upgrade. So I found a good deal on a lightly used 20-inch bandsaw, which should be all I need for a very long time. And I know it was lightly used because when I got the saw into my shop, I found the owner's manual in the lower cabinet of the saw, covered in a thin layer of sawdust, so whoever owned it before me didn't even take the time to open up the saw and look around before they sold it. All right, I know we've been focusing a lot on the curves and the epoxy panel, the interesting parts of this piece so far, and that's on purpose. Of course, I want people to be interested in what they're watching, and I wouldn't want to start the video with one of the more mundane parts of the build. That'd be like if the opening scene of Jaws didn't have a shark attack. But that being said, even the mundane stuff has its place, and in the case of the light fixture, the majority of the piece is made up of these flat panels between the two curved ends. So they might not get the same attention and screen time, we're kind of just running through it here. They are just two rectangular pieces of wood after all, but they're just as important as anything else. At this point, you're maybe thinking we're done making curves, or maybe you're not, since I did show you a drawing of the piece earlier in the video and you probably have a pretty good memory. But either way, I needed to make the contrasting accent piece that would go around the main part of the light. And the reason I had to wait until now to do it is because I needed the first curves to act as my form for the curves on this accent piece. Maybe this is glaringly obvious to most people, but as the thickness of a curve increases, so does the radius. So I couldn't just use the same curved form for the accent pieces because they'd end up too small to fit around the main curves. And instead of making a new MDF form and trying to perfectly match the outer radius of my main curves to bend these new pieces, the easiest thing to do was just use the actual parts as the form. So besides that, it was really the same exact process as the first curves I made, which is kind of ironic since I was just talking about how the curves are the interesting part of the build and some of the other stuff is mundane. But here we are essentially watching the exact same sequence of events that we did earlier in the video, just with a slightly different colored wood. So somehow I've managed to take something interesting and make it boring. I wonder which part of Jaws that is. All right, things are really starting to come together. So if you're enjoying the process and you're enjoying what I'm building, click that subscribe button. It really helps my channel grow and allows me to keep making these videos. And if you're looking to support even more, or you just want to see more of me blabbering about making furniture, go check out my Patreon page. I appreciate the support. And of course, if none of that sounds good to you, I really just appreciate you watching here. And I know the vast majority of people watch these videos because they maybe like woodworking or furniture making and they don't necessarily do it themselves, or maybe more broadly, they just like to see people build stuff or watch something come together. But for the small percentage of people that actually want to build stuff as well, go check out our online furniture courses. They're a great way to learn new skills or take your current skills to the next level. And we put a ton of time and effort into breaking down our builds into easy to understand video chapters that'll walk you through building a piece of furniture step by step. So I'll put a link in the description if you're interested. Otherwise, let's knock out this chamfer on the underside of the lampshade. Then we can get the accent strip glued onto the outside. Remember how I mentioned that part about the reason I made the white panel out of epoxy is because I needed to cut holes through it in order to attach the lampshade? Well, it's now or never. I came up with a bunch of different designs for how I would attach this panel to the center of the lamp, and I had a very specific look in mind. The main thing I wanted was for the panel to extend above the lampshade and for the light to be able to shine up out of the top. And I also wanted the center panel to almost look like it was floating inside of the light fixture as much as possible. So with all of that in mind, I ended up landing on using 3 cross pieces that would attach to the sides and go through the epoxy panel to let it kind of hang in the center. And honestly, this was one of the things I was probably most worried about, And I went through a bunch of different design ideas and wasn't totally sure how it would work. But when it came to actually doing it, I was able to easily drill out some holes, then use a simple template to get them to the exact shape and size that I needed. And with my cross pieces rounded over to match the radius in the holes, I got a very nice fit. Oh, that's a very nice fit. All right, so we essentially have a nice looking curved box and a white epoxy panel that hangs within said box. So pretty obviously, we need to turn this into a working light fixture. And light fixtures need to do a couple things to be considered useful. First, for this particular style of light fixture, it needs to hang from the ceiling. So I needed lots of little parts that I could kind of screw together to do exactly that. And second, a light fixture needs light, so an LED strip for that.
Oh yeah, look at that.
As much as I love woodworking, it's obviously the main thing that I do, there's something about this part of the build that I really enjoy. Maybe it's the change of pace, doing something different. Maybe it's because I grew up making things with Lego and Tinker toys. But first of all, figuring out how I would hang the light fixture, I basically had to hobble together a bunch of lamp parts that I'm not totally sure were designed for this exact purpose. Then also just getting to put it all together and see if it works is something that I really enjoy doing. And I was at the point where this whole build was finally starting to come together and it was looking like an actual light fixture. So I started adding finish to some of the places that I wouldn't be able to easily get to once everything was fully assembled, which meant all I really needed to do from here was give this light fixture some actual light. And unfortunately, this is the part that I hate. I know I started this video saying that I simultaneously love and hate this piece, and I apologize for leaving it almost to the end here, but the thing I hate about this light is the actual light. And I suppose this is the main bummer when making prototypes. Everything's kind of an experiment, and unfortunately, not all of them turn out perfectly. And in this case, the LED strip lights and all of the wiring on the inside of the lamp really just kind of look like On the bright side, you won't really see this stuff once the lamp is done. But the bummer is that the way you can see all of this is from above or below, and for the most part, when sitting at a dining table, you're below the light fixture. I kind of knew this would happen when I was designing it, but I was hoping the LED strips and wiring would maybe be a little less bulky than they are, or that I could figure something out on the fly. But I think the biggest bummer is that, like I said at the beginning, the nature of what I do means I probably won't ever build a version 2 of this light. And that means I won't really be able to figure out a way to fix the things that I don't like, even though I know there's gotta be a way to do it. All right, I can't end this video on a bummer like that. So let's just take a look at this light from its good angles. And I have to say, it looks pretty good. Just don't look at that. And if I want to make myself feel better about the parts I don't like, I just remind myself that it's a prototype. You know, I bet Doc Brown thought his first time machine looked pretty cool. And that thing had wires all over the inside of it. So I guess at the end of the day, if I were only making furniture that I knew was going to come out perfectly, things would be a lot more boring for all of us. And who knows, maybe at some point down the line I'll get a chance for redemption and I'll make the new and improved version. The one that's showroom ready and really looking great, and more importantly, the one that I don't partially hate.